The thing about humans, as I learned during my 17 cycles serving the Valdreen Collective, is that they break in the most inconvenient ways. Not physically. Oh no, that would be too simple. Their bodies could take punishment that would liquefy a Kryn warrior or snap a Torvex carapace like dried fungus. I had watched human test subjects endure neural shredders, gravity crushers, and atmospheric destabilization that should have turned their insides into soup. They screamed. Sure, they bled, but they kept breathing. The problem was their minds. Specifically, what happened when you pushed those minds past every logical breaking point and they still refused to shatter. My name is Valdreen Collective, and I was the head of Experimental Compliance Division 7, aboard the research station Crimson Harvest. Fancy title for what amounted to professional torture, but the collective preferred elegant terminology for ugly work. We had tested 263 species over the past decade, cataloging their weaknesses, their pain thresholds, their breaking points, all in service of the great expansion. Naturally, can't conquer the galaxy without knowing exactly how to crush anyone who resists. Humans were subject batch 47, promising specimens, decent strength to weight ratio, adequate intelligence, terrible strategic coordination which made them easy prey when our harvest fleets descended on their colony worlds. We scooped up thousands for processing. Most went to labor camps or organic reclamation. The interesting ones came to stations like mine. That's where she entered my life and proceeded to ruin absolutely everything. Subject Epsilon 926. That was her designation in our files. I later learned her actual name was Kira Vasquez, though by the time I bothered asking, name seemed somewhat irrelevant given the circumstances. She arrived in a standard containment cylinder, unconscious from the transport drugs, along with 17 other human specimens. Nothing about her screamed special. Average height for her species at approximately 1.7 meters. Dark hair, brown skin, lean muscle structure. The intake report noted she had been a soldier on one of their frontier colonies, some backwater place called New Cascadia, that we had glassed during the third harvest wave. I remember my assistant, a nervous falcon named Prill, scanning through her data while I sipped my morning stimulant. This one has elevated stress hormone markers, he chittered, his compound eyes flickering with that annoying tic he developed when anxious, possible psychological instability. Perfect, I said, barely looking up from my reports. Start her on Protocol 6. Let's see how long she lasts. Protocol 6 was fairly straightforward by our standards. Physical endurance testing escalating to pain compliance training, with intermittent psychological stress bombardment. We would break down the subject's sense of self, reconstruct it according to collective parameters, then evaluate how effectively they could be repurposed as slave labor or disposable shock troops. Standard stuff. We had processed 46 other species through similar procedures. Kira woke up screaming. Not unusual. Well, most subjects panic when they regain consciousness in a holding cell with 3 walls of reinforced polymer and 1 wall of pure energy field. She threw herself at the barrier, which was adorable, then spent the next hour exploring every centimeter of her prison with systematic precision. Also not unusual. Humans were tool users. They liked understanding their environment. What caught my attention came later. During the first physical stress test, we placed her in Chamber 12, a lovely space where we could manipulate gravity, temperature, and atmospheric composition at will. Standard procedure was to start mild. Just enough discomfort to establish baseline responses. I increased the gravity to twice Earth standard. With baby's twice Earth standard, she dropped to her knees. Gasping. Expected. I raised the temperature 20 degrees. She started sweating. Also expected. Then she laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a broken, hysterical sound. A genuine, amused laugh that crackled through the observation speakers and made Prill jump so hard he dropped his data tablet. "Is something funny, subject?" I asked through the intercom, genuinely curious. She looked up at the nearest camera, sweat already plastering her hair to her forehead, and smiled. "Blood and stars," she smiled. "Just remembering basic training," she said between labored breaths. Drill sergeant used to make us do exercises in double gravity while he cranked the heat and played death metal. This is almost nostalgic. The scanners increased the gravity to 3 times Earth standard. She vomited, which was expected. Then she pushed herself back to her knees, then impossibly to her feet. She stood there shaking like a newborn Crex, blood vessels bursting in her eyes from the pressure, and she kept smiling. "You're gonna have to try harder than that," she wheezed. Challenge accepted. Over the next 15 cycles, I threw everything in our considerable arsenal at Kira Vasquez. Neural pain inducers that should have left her catatonic, sensory deprivation that broke most species in 48 hours, psychological torture protocols that had reduced mantric warriors to sobbing children, chemical interrogation cocktails that could make a Valdreen confess to crimes they hadn't even imagined yet. She endured all of it. More than that, she studied it. I began noticing patterns in her behavior that made my scales itch with unease. During pain compliance sessions, she would breathe in specific rhythms, her heart rate actually decreasing under extreme stress. During psychological bombardment, she would recite something under her breath. Poetry, I eventually determined. Ancient human verses about death and resilience and refusing to surrender. During the sensory deprivation cycles, she would move through elaborate physical exercises in the darkness, maintaining her strength and sanity through pure disciplined motion. She's adapting, Pearl observed during one of our review sessions. We were watching playback of Kira's latest neural stress test. She had lasted 6 hours before losing consciousness. The previous record for any species was 93 minutes. The previous record for any species was 93 minutes. The previous record for any species was 93 minutes. Every time we introduce a new protocol, her resistance improves. It's as if she's learning. Impossible, I said, but I didn't believe my own words anymore. Neural pain bypasses learning. It's direct stimulation of suffering centers. Perhaps for us, Hall Prill clicked thoughtfully. Hobbyists. Humans evolved in predator-rich environments. Their neurology is different. They have documented cases of individuals who train themselves to ignore pain, to push past physical limits through sheer mental discipline. Some of their ancient warrior cultures built entire philosophies around it. I pulled up Kira's file again, reading deeper this time. New Cascadia had been a military training world. She had been part of something called the Recon Marines, elite soldiers who specialized in long-range operations in hostile environments. The file included a note from the Harvest Commander. Subject resisted capture. Eliminated 7 collection drones and 12 infantry units before being subdued with heavy tranquilizers. Recommend immediate termination as high-risk individual. I had overridden that recommendation because I wanted interesting test subjects. Careful what you wish for, as the humans say. The real trouble started during cycle 23. I had escalated to combination protocols. Multiple stress vectors simultaneously. Pain plus psychological manipulation plus sensory distortion. We placed her in chamber 17. The bad room. The one we used for the truly stubborn subjects. The walls could display anything we programmed. Gravity could shift randomly. Sound, smell, touch. Everything could be weaponized. We showed her simulations of Earth burning. Human cities reduced to ash. Children screaming. We had excellent intelligence on human emotional vulnerabilities. Family and home were powerful pressure points. Kira watched the simulations with empty eyes, her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. When the program finished, she looked directly at the camera and said, "My family died when you glassed New Cascadia. I was off-world for training exercises. Came back to find my parents, my sister, my nephew. All of them turned to shadows burned into concrete. So those simulations? Not even close to what I've already lived through." The temperature in the observation deck seemed to drop several degrees. "You think you know pain?" she continued, her voice perfectly level despite the tears tracking down her face. "You think you understand suffering? You're amateurs. You press buttons and watch screens and pretend you're breaking people, but you're just tourists in a country I've been living in for years. The only question is whether you're smart enough to realize you're not torturing me." "Oh," I leaned forward. "Then what are we doing?" Her smile was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "You're training me." I should have terminated her right then. Protocol demanded it. High-risk subject displaying dangerous psychological patterns. Immediate disposal. But scientific curiosity has always been my weakness. I wanted to know what she meant. I wanted to understand what could possibly make a broken, isolated prisoner smile like she had just won something. So I kept her alive, kept testing, kept pushing, and thereby sealed the fate of the Valdreen Collective, though I didn't know it yet. The change came during cycle 38. We were running a standard endurance protocol. Nothing fancy. Moderate pain, mild environmental stress, basic compliance training. I was reviewing reports from other divisions. barely paying attention to the monitors. Prill was calibrating new equipment. Just another day processing another subject. Then all 7 observation screens went dark simultaneously. Prill? I looked up. What just happened? But I don't know. His mandibles clicked rapidly in distress. Complete signal loss from chamber 12. All sensors offline. Run diagnostics. Already running. Sir, this doesn't make sense. It's not a malfunction. The chamber systems are active, but they're not responding to our commands. It's like something is blocking our access. A cold sensation spread through my thorax. Activate backup visual. The screens flickered back to life, showing chamber 12 from emergency cameras. Kira stood in the center of the room, completely still, her eyes closed. Around her neck was something she shouldn't have possessed. A thin wire, the kind we used for equipment maintenance. Where had she gotten that? Then I noticed the access panel near the floor. She had somehow pried it open. During the chaos of the previous test, while sensors were focused on her biological responses, she must have worked at the seams with her bare hands until something gave way. She's hacked the chamber, Prill whispered.
How is that possible?
She has no tools, no interface, no. Kira's eyes opened. She looked directly at the backup camera and held up a small piece of circuitry she had extracted from the panel. Then she crushed it between her fingers. Every light in chamber 12 went dark. Lock down the sector, I barked. Full containment protocols. Get security teams. The lights came back on, but now they were different.
Pulsing.
Rhythmic. And Kira was moving. She had spent 38 cycles studying our procedures, watching how we manipulated gravity through precise energy field adjustments, observing how temperature controls operated, learning the timing of every system, every safety protocol, every automated response. While we thought we were testing her, she had been reverse engineering our entire facility. And now she was reprogramming chamber 12. The gravity in the room began shifting in waves. Not randomly, deliberately. She had created a pattern that would allow her to build momentum to move in ways that should have been impossible under our control. The temperature spiked, then dropped, creating convection currents that made the air itself flow in specific directions. What is she doing? Prill sounded on the verge of panic. I understood before he did. She's escaping. Kira ran at the energy barrier holding her in the chamber. Under normal gravity she would have bounced off harmlessly, but she had timed her approach for the exact moment when the fluctuating fields dropped to 0.7 Earth standard. She hit the barrier with reduced impact, which meant reduced feedback, which meant the safety systems didn't fully engage. The barrier flickered. For just a fraction of a second, but it flickered. She pulled back, adjusted something in the wall panel, ran the pattern again. This time the barrier held. She modified her approach. Third attempt. Fourth. Each time learning, refining, improving her technique. Send security now. I was already backing away from the observation deck, my survival instincts finally overriding my curiosity. Evacuate the sector. She's going to. The barrier failed completely on attempt 17. Kira Vasquez stepped out of chamber 12 into the corridor beyond. Alarms shrieked throughout the station. Emergency bulkheads began slamming down. She moved with liquid precision. Everything she had learned about our facility during weeks of observation, now guiding her path. She knew where the blind spots were. She knew the response time for security teams. She knew exactly how much head start she had before overwhelming force arrived. 12 minutes as it turned out. 12 minutes before containment teams could mobilize and secure her position. She made it to Sector 7 in 11. Sector 7 was where we kept the other human test subjects. I watched from the main security hub as she bypassed 3 separate lock systems, each time working faster than the previous one, her fingers manipulating components with surgical precision. Where had she learned engineering? Her file said she was a soldier, not a technician. The holding cells opened. 17 other humans stumbled out, disoriented and weakened from processing. They looked at Kira with confusion, then recognition, then something else. Something dangerous. A hope. She spoke quickly to them in their language. Our translators caught fragments, words like fight and together, and make them pay. They were in no condition for combat. We had spent weeks breaking them down, reducing them to compliance. But she was their reminder of what they used to be, of what they could still become. When security teams arrived in Sector 7, they found 19 humans armed with improvised weapons, fighting positions established, and a leader who had spent over a month learning every weakness in our systems. The first security team went down in under 30 seconds. The second team called for backup. By the third team's arrival, Kira had accessed a weapons locker and distributed actual firearms to her group. I stood in the command center watching my carefully organized research station descend into absolute chaos, and I realized with growing horror that I had made a terrible miscalculation. We hadn't been testing humanity's limits. We had been teaching their best warrior exactly how to destroy us. And class was officially in session. The thing about cascading failures, and I speak from painful experience here, is that they never announce themselves with dramatic flair. No ominous music. No flashing warning signs. Just a series of small decisions that seem perfectly reasonable, right up until the moment your entire civilization collapses around your auditory membranes. For me, that moment came when Kira Vasquez walked into the station armory. Not broke into, mind you, walked. Because by hour 3 of what the collective would later call the Crimson Harvest incident, she had stopped needing to bypass security systems. She had convinced them to open for her. Let me backtrack slightly. Because the descent into madness deserves proper documentation. After the initial breakout, I had assumed containment would be a matter of time and resources. Yes, she had freed the other human subjects. Yes, they had eliminated several security teams, but we had 600 personnel on Crimson Harvest, multiple heavy weapons platforms, and complete control of life support systems. Standard siege protocol dictated we simply seal affected sectors, vent the atmosphere, and collect the bodies for disposal. I gave the order. Prill, who had been monitoring environmental controls, made a sound like grinding gravel. His species only made that noise when experiencing existential dread. Sir, the atmospheric controls aren't responding. What do you mean they're not responding? I mean that, when I input the vent command for Sector 7, the system acknowledges receipt, confirms execution, and then does absolutely nothing. It's as if something is intercepting the orders and just ignoring them. I felt that cold sensation in my thorax again, Hall, the same one from when she had first taken control of Chamber 12. She's in the environmental system. That's impossible. She would need administrative access codes that we change every 6 hours through quantum encrypted channels. There's no way a subject with no equipment could possibly. The lights in the command center dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again in a specific pattern. 3 short pulses, 3 long, 3 short. Prill's translator took a moment to process. That's an ancient human distress signal. She's mocking us. Actually, as I learned later, she was communicating. The other humans on the station, scattered across various holding sectors, recognized that pattern, recognized what it meant, that someone was fighting back, that maybe they weren't as helpless as we had made them believe. The holding cells in Sectors 3, 9, and 14 experienced simultaneous lock failures within the next hour. Station Commander Threlix, a hulking Torvek with all the strategic imagination of fermented paste, decided the appropriate response was overwhelming force. Hold, he deployed our entire security contingent, 96 soldiers in full combat gear, with orders to sterilize the affected areas. They made it as far as Junction Gamma before the gravity plating failed beneath them. Not randomly, selectively. The sections where our security team stood suddenly experienced 6 times standard gravity. The sections where humans were moving remained at Earth normal. Our troops collapsed under their own weight, bones snapping, organs rupturing. The humans walked over them like they were sleeping. I watched it happen on the monitors, my scales itching with frustrated disbelief. She's had less than 4 hours of freedom. How is she learning our systems faster than we can respond? Because she's not learning them. Prill said quietly, his mandibles still. She already learned them. During testing, she's been watching us for weeks, memorizing every process, every command structure, every security protocol. We thought we were observing her. She was observing us. The humans converged on the armory at hour 5. By hour 6, they controlled 3 complete decks. Commander Threlix authorized use of the plasma purge system, military-grade atmospheric incinerators that could reduce organic matter to component atoms. There was no defense against them. You either evacuated the affected zone or you died. He gave the humans 10 minutes to surrender. Kira's response came through the station intercom, in her accented but grammatically perfect Valdreen. Counter-proposal. You have 8 minutes to abandon this station before I overload your primary reactor and turn this entire facility into a very brief new sun. Your choice. Trellix actually laughed. The idiot laughed. Empty threat. Reactor overload requires physical access to the core chamber, which is behind 40-centimeter reinforced bulkheads with independent power and security. She's bluffing. I pulled up the reactor monitoring systems just to confirm his confidence was justified. The core temperature was rising. Not rapidly, just steadily, precisely.
One was manipulating the control rods, withdrawing them at calculated intervals, creating a chain reaction that would build over exactly 8 minutes before crossing the threshold into catastrophic failure.
She's in the reactor systems, I said, my voice remarkably calm considering I was contemplating imminent vaporization. She actually found a way into the reactor systems. Trellix stopped laughing. We evacuated. All non-essential personnel to the docking bays, cramming into emergency shuttles designed for half their capacity. Trellix went first, naturally, along with his command staff. I stayed in the operations center with Prill and a skeleton crew, watching the reactor temperatures climb while simultaneously trying to understand how a human soldier with no formal engineering training had infiltrated systems that took our best technicians years to master. The answer, when it came, was so obvious I wanted to molt from embarrassment. She hadn't done it alone. During her weeks in captivity, during all those tests and torture sessions, we had monitored her constantly, which meant thousands of hours of footage showing her every moment in the cells, including the moments between tests when she would press her hands against the walls, close her eyes, and appear to be meditating. She had been feeling the vibrations. Every system on a space station produces unique frequencies.
Yes, power conduits hum at specific pitches.
Life support systems cycle with particular rhythms. Reactor operations create distinctive harmonic patterns. She had learned to read the station's infrastructure through touch and sound, building a mental map of every critical system. And then, when she escaped, she used that knowledge to identify access points, not through computer terminals or control panels, through the maintenance passages, the service crawlways, the spaces we never monitored because who would look for threats in cable housings and air recyclers? She had moved through our station's nervous system like a virus, understanding it better than we did because she had approached it from an entirely different perspective. We saw computers and code. She saw physics and patterns. The reactor stabilized at 7 minutes 38 seconds. Kira's voice returned to the intercom, now carrying an edge of satisfaction. Thank you for evacuating the civilian areas. Made this next part much simpler. Next part? The humans took control of the docking bays. Not by force. They simply walked into them. After we had conveniently gathered all our shuttles in one location and reduced security to skeleton levels. They disabled the vessels, ensuring no one else could leave, then sealed the bay doors. We were trapped on our own station. I believe this is what you call a negotiating position, Kira said through the speakers. Here are my terms. Every human on this station gets relocated to the remaining functional shuttles. You provide us with navigation data for the nearest non-collective world, and you give me complete access to your research database. Trellix, communicating from his shuttle still docked in the bay, tried to sound authoritative despite his current impotence. Absolutely not. The research data represents decades of strategic intelligence. We would rather destroy the station than let it fall into enemy hands. Then destroy it, Kira said simply. But you're all still stuck in that docking bay, so you'll be destroying yourselves too. Seems counterproductive. Silence on the command channel while Trellix contemplated his limited options. What do you want with our research? I asked, genuinely curious despite everything. Her answer chilled my circulatory system. I want to know everything you learned about us, about the other species you tested. About your weaknesses. Because when we're done here, when we get those humans home, we're not going to hide, we're not going to run. We're going to make sure nothing like this ever happens to anyone ever again. It was a declaration of war, from a single escaped prisoner to the entire Valdreen Collective. We should have been amused. We should have been dismissive. We commanded 300 worlds, billions of troops, technology refined over millennia. But I looked at the monitors showing this one human who had systematically dismantled our research station using nothing but observation and determination, and I felt something I had never experienced before. Fear. Real, primal, Survival instinct fear. We gave her the data. We gave her the shuttles. We watched as 63 humans, many of them barely able to walk after weeks of processing, loaded themselves into vessels they barely knew how to operate, carrying with them every piece of intelligence we had gathered on collective operations. Kira was the last to board. She stood in the docking bay airlock, looking back at the camera I was watching through, and I swear she smiled directly at me. "Thank you for the education, Vekran Multhus," she said, using my actual name for the first time. She had pulled it from our personnel files. "See you soon." The shuttles departed. We spent the next 6 hours regaining control of our own station, documenting the damage, trying to understand how thoroughly she had compromised our systems. The preliminary reports were catastrophic. She had accessed everything: personnel records, research protocols, fleet deployment schedules, strategic weakness assessments for 60 different species. 3 cycles later, the first human attack struck a collective listening post in the Outer Rim. Not a military vessel. Humans didn't have those yet. It was one of the shuttles from Crimson Harvest, modified and armed with weapons they had apparently fabricated from stolen collective technology. They hit the post with precision that should have been impossible for such a primitive species, destroyed it completely, and vanished before response forces arrived. Commander Threlix declared it a lucky strike, an anomaly, nothing to concern the greater collective. The attacks continued. Human resistance cells, armed with knowledge from our own research, began targeting collective operations with disturbing effectiveness. They knew our patrol routes, our communication protocols, our supply chains. Every weakness we had carefully documented about other species, humans now exploited in reverse, using our own strategic doctrine against us. The Collective Council convened emergency sessions. How had humans barely space-capable become such effective insurgents? Where had they learned modern warfare tactics? I attended one of those sessions, 3 months after the Crimson Harvest incident. I stood before the council and explained, in excruciating detail, exactly how we had created our own nightmare. How we had taken their best warriors, isolated them, studied them, pushed them past every breaking point, and in doing so, given them a master class in collective methodology. The council wanted scapegoats. Threlix lost his command. Several researchers were reassigned to labor details. I was demoted but kept in an advisory role because I at least understood what we were facing. The human attacks escalated. 6 months after Crimson Harvest, they hit a supply depot using coordinated strikes that mimicked a collective special operations doctrine perfectly. 9 months later, they liberated a prison transport carrying 2,000 humans destined for processing. 1 year later, they destroyed an entire harvest fleet. The collective, which had expanded across the galaxy for 3 centuries without significant resistance, suddenly found itself fighting a species that refused to be conquered, that learned from every encounter, that treated defeat not as an ending, but as education. And leading many of those operations, according to intelligence reports that made my scales itch with grim recognition, was a woman named Kira Vasquez. The subject Epsilon 926. The human we had tested for 38 cycles. The Collective Council eventually authorized negotiations. Not surrender. They insisted. Just dialogue. An attempt to understand human demands so we could find acceptable terms. I was selected to represent our interests. Because I knew her. Because I had overseen her processing. Because the Council believed I had insight into human psychology that might prove valuable. The meeting took place on a neutral station in unclaimed space. Heavy security on both sides. Diplomatic protocols carefully observed. I entered the negotiation chamber, expecting to face a battle-scarred warrior, hardened by months of guerrilla warfare. Instead, Kira walked in looking almost exactly as she had in her cell. Thin, calm. Those same dark eyes that had watched me through monitors for weeks. She wore a simple uniform, no weapons visible, and she moved with the same precise economy of motion I remembered. We sat across from each other at a table designed for species compatibility. "Hello, Vekran," she said pleasantly. "Been a while." "You've been busy," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Learned from the best."
She smiled. "You spent weeks teaching me about collective operations."
Seemed rude not to apply those lessons. "You've killed thousands of my people. You killed millions of mine." Her smile never wavered. "I'd say we're not even close to even yet." The negotiations lasted 6 hours. Kira's demands were straightforward. complete withdrawal of collective forces from all human worlds, return of all human prisoners, full access to collective technology databases so humanity could rebuild their destroyed colonies, and formal recognition of human sovereignty, with guaranteed non-interference. The Collective Council, when I reported back, called those terms absurd, surrender in all but name. We were still militarily superior. We still controlled vast territories. One persistent insurgency didn't erase 3 centuries of dominance. I told them they were fools. Not in those words, obviously.
I valued my life.
But I explained as clearly as possible that we weren't fighting a normal enemy. We were fighting a species that had evolved in an environment so hostile, so unforgiving, that they had developed psychological resilience as a survival trait. They didn't break, they adapted, and every time we fought them, we taught them how to fight better. The Council ignored me. The war continued for another year. A brutal, grinding conflict that cost the Collective more resources and personnel than the previous 3 decades of expansion combined. Human forces grew more sophisticated, acquiring allies among species we had conquered, building a coalition united by shared trauma and desire for freedom. The Collective began losing territory. Not quickly, but steadily, inexorably, like watching ice melt, knowing you can't stop the process. 2 years after Crimson Harvest, the Council authorized genuine peace negotiations, not dialogue. Actual surrender of positions, because continued conflict was unsustainable. I was again selected as primary negotiator, this time representing a collective that had finally learned the lesson I had tried teaching them. You cannot conquer humans through force. You can only teach them to conquer you. The final treaty was signed on what remained of New Cascadia. Kara had insisted on the location, standing in the ruins of her homeworld, while dictating terms to the civilization that had destroyed it. Poetic, really. The collective withdrew from human space. He returned prisoners, provided technology, acknowledged sovereignty. We agreed to reparations, to non-interference, to everything Kira had demanded 18 months earlier. But the most interesting clause came at the end. The treaty established a multi-species council to govern relationships between the collective and the allied species that had supported human resistance. Someone needed to chair that council. Someone who understood both sides. Someone who had credibility with former victims and could enforce compliance from former oppressors. The position was offered to Kira Vasquez. She accepted, which is how Subject Epsilon 926, the human we had tested and tortured and unwittingly trained, became the de facto ruler of the largest political entity in our region of space. Emperor. Some species called her Arbiter, Peacekeeper. The titles varied, but the reality was consistent. She had authority over territories the collective had spent centuries acquiring. She commanded respect from dozens of species. She made decisions that affected trillions of lives. And she did it all because we had made her our test subject. I see her occasionally, at council meetings or treaty negotiations. She's always cordial, asks about my work, my family, whether I've pursued any interesting research lately, as if we're old colleagues rather than former torturer and victim. Last month, during a break in negotiations over trade route disputes, she pulled me aside. "You know what the funny part is?" she asked. "Enlighten me." "I actually am grateful." She said it without irony. "Everything you put me through, every test, every protocol, it taught me things I never would have learned otherwise. About endurance, about systems thinking, about finding strength in the worst possible circumstances. You tried to break me, and instead you forged me into exactly what I needed to be. I didn't know what to say to that." She smiled, the same terrifying smile I remembered from Chamber 12. "So, thank you, Vekran Molthas. Thank you for making me your last test subject. Made it much easier to become your last emperor." Then she returned to the negotiations, leaving me standing there contemplating the magnificent absurdity of it all. The Valdreen Collective had conquered most of the known galaxy through superior technology and ruthless efficiency. We had tested hundreds of species, documented their weaknesses, built an empire on understanding how to break anyone who opposed us. Then we encountered humans. And we learned, far too late, that some species don't break. They just take notes.